Hey, welcome to another episode of the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. Search for us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, wherever you listen to these things, and hit subscribe, and you'll get all of our content coming right to you if you do that. Today, if you like JMU sports, today we got all of it going on like right now. It's spring, which means bat and ball season, lacrosse, all kind of heading towards the home stretch, and the spring football game coming up, and also portal season for basketball. All of that happening right now. We're going to touch on some of that, especially the spring game, basketball portal later. We're going to start with some softball and baseball for JMU fans here, where it's been. It seems like it was just the other day we talked about how the JMU baseball team maybe was looking up. They come off a victory against U.Va, a sweep of Louisiana. Everything's looking really good. And then that just did not last for this team. As we were talking a little bit before we hit record, pitching has really been a struggle since that 1 to 2 week period where we thought this team might end up being pretty competitive in the Sun Belt, and then it's just really taken a dive here in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, they haven't won a game now since that UVA game. They've gotten swept over the last two Sun Belt weekends against Georgia State and then against App State. So it's been a rough stretch, and this baseball team is dealing with a few injuries that are kind of substantial to the lineup. Josiah Seguin has been in and out of the lineup, and that is someone that Eikenberry was very excited for heading into the season. He thought he could really, really do well at JMU, and he had done really well up until kind of being in and out of the lineup with some injuries. Eikenberry had said a couple weeks ago that he's hoping that Seguin is back soon. That could potentially be this weekend at ULM, which would be a major return for the team. But, right as they were starting to get some of their pitchers back from injury, including a guy like Jaden Kinsler, they lose another one of their best field players in Clay Thompson, who he went hard into the center field wall against App State, stayed in the game for a little bit, and then ended up leaving before the fifth inning. And it's just losing guys like him and Seguin. It's kind of detrimental to that lineup. And, you look at yesterday against George Mason, they still had over, I think it was like 10, 12 hits, something like that. And they still can't get the runs that they need to win this game. And it's just everything has seemed to go wrong for this program at the same time. And a lot of it, like you said, starts with pitching, which has been, pretty shaky kind of all year. It was good when they needed it to be against UVA, but other than that, at times it's been a struggle. And I think Eikenberry now I think you're starting to see maybe a little bit of the frustration that it's not coming together the way he thought it would, but he's taking a new approach now. He's trying to kind of do it in a piggyback system. I wrote about it yesterday or the day before, and he's hoping that, if they can tell two guys, hey, your only responsibility today is to go out, get 9 outs, get 12 outs. He's hoping that will kind of help this group settle down as they go into the second half of the Sun Belt schedule.
Yeah. Like you said, there's been a lot of things that contributed to this. I mean, some of the names you mentioned, I mean, obviously Clay Thompson was playing really, really well, but, you mentioned multiple names that they could really use right now that they just don't have. But at the same time, with Sun Belt baseball, you're going to have some tough stretches, but this isn't like they've played, back-to-back series against Coastal and Southern Miss and lost 6 in a row. I mean, not to knock the teams that they did play, but if you're playing 6 games against Georgia State and App State, you probably think you're going to win at least a couple of those. And to like this past weekend against App State, just it got ugly. Like at the start, I mean, from game 1 through game 3, it was never really competitive.
No, I was out there on Saturday for the 19-10 game, and I mean, you liked what they showed at times. I mean, they were down 9-1 heading into the bottom of the second inning, and eventually they get it to 9-8, and you're thinking, okay, maybe JMU has it in them to really respond and get a win after being down a substantial number of runs early in the game. And it just kind of, from that point, it spiraled. App State kept extending the lead, and JMU really couldn't stop them from doing it. And it was, it was one of those things that after that game, Eikenberry said if someone had told him his team would have 15 hits and 10 runs and still lose the game, he would have said that they were lying. He would have thought that was not a possibility that this team would lose a game in that kind of situation. But it's what happened. And App State just put up more hits, and it was just almost like they were doing it at ease at times.
Yeah. You mentioned that they have not won since going to Charlottesville and knocking off UVA. I'm sure JMU fans are hoping that's not going to be the case for the softball team, which has been they've taken some lumps at times, but has been a little bit more able to string together some success. And I think coming off a late season surge last year where they make it all the way to the Sun Belt Championship game, there's probably got to be a little more confidence coming off last night's victory against UVA for that team to maybe be able to build off of that and do something here in the second half of the Sun Belt schedule.
I think they needed that win too. Talking with Laporte on Monday, that team was a little heartbroken after how the series at App State for them ended with losing it in the bottom of the 7th inning. So for them to get back on track and do it against a team as good as UVA has been this year, and UVA itself has gone through its own struggles over the last couple of weeks on on the softball side of things, but Laporte said that they needed a bounce back performance after that kind of heartbreak on Sunday, and I think you saw that, especially as the game went on and the way they were able to win it by putting up the runs in the top of the 7th inning. That was a massive one for them, and I think now Laporte just kind of wants to see that carry into this last little home stretch as they host Georgia State, I believe, this weekend,
Yeah.
because they kind of need that to extend into conference play and not just get those kind of wins outside of the conference.
Yeah, and Georgia State sitting at the bottom of the Sun Belt standings. You would hope that
You would hope.
that's a series JMU can, at the very least, win the series, if not sweep that one, because you got first place Marshall to wrap up the regular season, and that's going to be tough. But if you do continue to have some momentum and win 4 or 5 games here down the stretch, it does put you in a lot better position where you sit right in the middle of the pack in the Sun Belt standings right now, and getting yourself a decent seed into the conference tournament, which we saw last year could be pretty huge. And they were right on the verge of winning that and making to the NCAA regionals.
Yeah, and I think for the softball team, it's almost similar to baseball. The pitching needs to be a little more consistent than it has been, and I think that's kind of been what's maybe surprising to viewers this year is that Kirsten Fleet and Peyton List have not been kind of these lights out performers that they've seen in the past. They've had their struggles, and Peyton List has had her struggles at the plate as well, but seemed to correct that yesterday at UVA with a couple home runs. But they need to kind of find a steady performance from their pitchers in the circle to if they want to spur kind of that run that they had last year.
Yeah, it's been kind of hard to figure out exactly why they haven't had the consistent pitching here for the last couple of years, because they brought in some talented players, highly recruited players and everything. And it's just obviously the standard for pitching, coming off that College World Series appearance in 2021 and the string of regional runs and everything before that, the standard for what JV pitching was really high. But right now they need to like that more consistency. They've hit that top level at times. Peyton List has had some games this year where she's looked really, really good, but they just don't have that night in, night out in the Sun Belt, which you would have thought going in when JMU joined the Sun Belt. I think everybody expected, oh wow, JMU and Louisiana in the same conference. That's going to be like incredible softball. And now both of those programs are kind of finding themselves in not their peak places as what they've done historically.
Yeah, and I think what's also like interesting too on the pitching front is that, going into the season, I think anybody would have said that they would have expected Peyton List or Kirsten Fleet to kind of be the most consistent pitcher for JMU. And that's not the case right now. I think, if you look at this program, Taylor Johnson for them has kind of been their best pitcher, especially of late. She's been the one that can kind of get them out of tough situations and, keep games in favor of JMU. So to not have kind of that, big star that they expected is, it's difficult, especially when you talked about it, like it, coming off of the regional, when your standard for several years is Odyssey Alexander, Megan Good, Jalen Ford, to then kind of drop off and not have a pitcher that can kind of, maintain that success through the season. It's been a little hard for them to overcome that.
Yeah, and maybe Taylor Johnson as a sophomore is the one who ends up developing into that kind of star that they've had in the past, that dominant pitcher that can really carry a team through to 40 wins, which, sometimes you only need one really, really great pitcher in softball. We'll see if that ends up kind of being the case in the next couple of years for her. Moving along to spring football. I know you said a few minutes ago, off the air, you're kind of excited for this to wind down. It's been a little bit of a grind, like here for spring. Just for one thing, you got to learn all these new faces and names, like players and coaches, everything. But Saturday, we're going to see the spring game. Obviously, everybody wants to go out and see the quarterbacks play because it's, more than ever, it's like the big question, who's going to play quarterback for JMU. You don't even have it narrowed down to like a top two at this point. Obviously, we want to see that. So we'll talk a little bit about those quarterbacks before we move on to basketball. But what else are fans needing to look for here? I mean, we kind of know the main names. We know kind of the position groups, generally speaking. But what is it that we're going to see on Saturday that'll kind of shed some light on what JMU has?
Yeah, I just want the listeners to know, me saying that I'm ready for the spring season to end, it's it's with great happiness because I have a ton of content that I can write about into the summer. Billy Napier has given us so much access to this team where, tomorrow we will talk to the final two assistant coaches that we haven't talked to yet. We'll talk to at least two more players that we haven't talked to yet. So I have so many interviews right now backlogged to do stories from. So part of me wanting this season, the spring season to end, is then I can finally like sit down and actually comb through all of that. Tuesdays and Thursdays and even Saturdays for me are a little hectic at this time of year, going from, yesterday was football practice and then I was over at Eastern Mennonite for softball, and last Saturday it was football and then baseball. So, eventually I'll be able to comb through all of this and give some more in-depth answers on what to look for. But like you said, quarterbacks are obviously going to be, the drawing point. Everybody wants to see them. They want to see guys like Camden Coleman and JC Evans get another chance on the field. But when you look outside of that, one thing, I think the offensive line and the defensive line should be fun to watch and just kind of see the size that they bring, because, this is kind of the first year that I feel like I've stood at practice and felt really short next to the offensive line, which I've always felt short next to them, but this year they walk by you and you're like, okay, this is a big group up front. So I think there'll be a fun one to kind of see how they work at the spring game. But then even on just the defensive side of the ball, you lost your two team captains and Trent Hendrick and Jacob Thomas. And so I think it will be interesting to see kind of who steps up and who you see as a vocal leader throughout this spring game on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas, any thoughts about who that might be? I think, Gannon Weatherby's obviously kind of one that, like, okay, well, he's been around for a while. He plays that linebacker spot. Like, maybe he's the guy. But at the same time, despite, going viral with the face paint and everything, like, I don't know if he's as vocal. Is he as, like, maybe
he's definitely taken a step forward in terms of being a leader, and he's talked about it with us that he really has tried to embrace that role, especially knowing that a guy like Trent is no longer beside him. But I think one guy that we've really seen take a step forward and he's always been vocal, but now he's heading into that territory of being an upperclassman is KJ Flo, playing behind DJ Barksdale for the last couple of years, but he's gotten to pick DJ Barksdale's brain. He had the opportunity to pick Jacob Thomas's brain. So he's someone that you're really, really starting to see come out I don't even want to say come out of his shell because again, he's always been a talkative guy. You always kind of know where KJ Flow is at practice, but he's someone that has gotten quite a bit of praise from the coaching staff for really kind of, stepping up and being a leader that can kind of help especially the secondary grow and take some steps forward.
Yeah. Um, Offensively, is there anybody who's kind of stepped up as far as like, obviously the quarterback, whoever ends up winning the job, is going to have that role a little bit. But being that there's so many new faces, is it somebody like a George Pettaway who is back, or Brendan Wiswaski who's back from last year, or is it maybe somebody on the offensive line? I guess Zach Greenberg could fit to that category as also being a veteran and an offensive lineman, but is there anybody old or new who's maybe kind of stepped up as like, okay, this guy's really kind of running things?
Yeah, it's interesting too because I would say on the offensive side of the ball, there isn't one that is, on the defense, where KJ Flow is, where Gannon Weathersby is. You don't necessarily have that too much with the offense. It does kind of right now feel a little bit more by committee. We talked to William Piegler yesterday, the running backs coach, and he said he's pushing George Pettaway to kind of break out of his shell and be more of a vocal guy, which, for the two of us, we've talked to Pettaway in the past. He's not a loud guy. I mean,
Yeah.
he's one of those guys that kind of leads by where he'll put the pads down and he'll run through some guys, but when he's talking, he's pretty quiet. And so Piegler said he's really, really tried to challenge Pettaway to be a little bit more vocal and kind of step up. And I think Pettaway has embraced that a little bit too. But I think you look across, I mean, one that was kind of maybe not too surprising because I've talked with him several times and he does have it like a little bit of an Energizer Bunny personality to him, but because of his age, I wasn't expecting it. But Mikey Scott has really tried from that jump from freshman to sophomore year to be someone who can help, especially the freshmen, the incoming guys that are on campus early. He's really trying to lead those guys and get them acclimated to the game. But I think when you look across this entire offense, it's hard maybe to narrow it down. I think a Zach Greenberg gets a lot of respect for his time playing at the college level, and I think a lot of the guys have really started to look up to and welcome in Tyler Brown, who is a newcomer, but has been playing college football since 2019, and I think people are respecting him as well.
Yeah, I was almost wondering if it could like almost go to, like you said, by committee, if it could almost be like a position group where obviously there's new guys at wide receiver too, and some of them are really going to get to play, but at the very least, you've got, Wisloski, you've got Mikey Scott, you've got Jaden Mines, who we've talked about last week. All these guys who have been in the program at least for a year. Do they, as a collective group, kind of like take on that role a little bit?
You mentioned Jaden Mines there too, because Napier described him the other week as kind of the grandfather of the team because of how long he's been at JMU. And, you mentioning him jogged my memory of something I saw at practice. I guess it was yesterday, but it could have been on Saturday where, Trayshawn Dye is moving over from linebacker. He's moved over to running back. And, the running backs and wide receivers were going through this passing drill of, it's just kind of to catch the ball coming over their shoulder and hold on to it. And, Trayshawn Dye dropped the pass and he didn't catch it. And, as he's going to get back in line, it's Jaden Mines who kind of pulls him, and you can tell, and I could hear him that he's going through how to catch it and like how to track it with his eyes. And it was one of those things where you see that as a leader, is Jaden Mines talking through, a young guy who had a great career in high school as a running back, talking him through kind of how to make sure that he's making those catches and being an asset to JMU if it comes to it out of the backfield.
Yeah. Which, it leads us into that quarterback discussion. I think obviously whoever wins that job is probably going to end up taking a lot of the responsibilities that we just talked about. But like we said, 4 people kind of seem to be in the running for it. Is it going to matter at all who takes the first snap on Saturday? Is that or
No,
yeah.
not at all. I couldn't even tell you with how they run practice. I couldn't even tell you who's potentially leading this category in this race right now. Because it's just been so everybody's playing with the ones, everyone's playing with the twos. Like, you don't see the same guy with the same group all the time. And so, For all I know, they could have Blake Kendall out there taking the first snap, and that's kind of the quarterback that isn't really in the hunt for the starting job. But it's just one of those groups right now where Billy Napier is really just enjoying the battle. And it should be interesting tomorrow. We're talking to their quarterback coach to, at least maybe get more of an insight on how that group's coming together. I would be very shocked if he gave any clues away about who he's thinking about starting with Napier, but it's a very competitive group. And with the leadership thing, yeah, like you said, whoever wins that job is going to take on a big chunk of that. And, just from watching guys, obviously, I think Cam Coleman has a tremendous history and experience leading. And he's someone that even now, he's not necessarily the starting quarterback. People still look to him. Same with JC Evans, Arrington Maiden. Like these guys have respect from this group. So I don't think it's necessarily one that, I don't think there's a wrong choice in terms of leadership potential.
Yeah, but I mean, you do bring up a good point that Cam Coleman does have the experience as being that guy, not at the FBS level, but like he's at least had that experience of being, okay, this is my team. I'm the starting quarterback. I'm out here. Whereas, the rest of, we'll call JC Evans young. He's been in the program for a while, but like I'm not even sure what he's classified as at this point without looking. Like redshirt sophomore, junior. I don't remember.
Redshirt sophomore.
Okay,
Gonna go
yeah,
with that.
but been in there for a few
I don't
years,
guess.
but hasn't, other than the bowl game where he kind of was playing a specialty role, hasn't been out there like just calling the shots. And then the other two guys who I think people are really, really excited to see are actually young. Like, like they haven't been playing college football for very long, haven't taken a lot of snaps. So I think we can probably count on both of those guys, Arrington Maiden and Davy Belfort, having some talent. But, as far as throwing them into the role of, hey, this is your team right now, that may be asking a lot for somebody who, when it comes to college football these days, where some guys are 24 or 25 years old, like that seems pretty young.
Yeah, I will say I haven't talked to Davy Belfort, but I talked to Arrington Maiden before he signed, and I will say with him at least, he doesn't come off as someone who's young in the game. He it's hard maybe to describe because unless you hear him talk, he has a confidence to him, but it's not arrogant in any way. Like I think he's very content in his belief that he can do what the coaches need him to do and ask him to do. He has that confidence, which I don't think you necessarily see a lot in younger players. That's usually something that needs to build over more time on the field. And obviously, he did see some playing time at Memphis, but not nearly as much as, a Cam Coleman at Richmond. But I will say, Maiden has a little bit of a confidence to him that I don't necessarily think I would have expected from someone his age. And again, it's not a bad confidence. This isn't like a dig at him at all. It's just like he has that self-belief.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that personality trait may be what draws people to playing quarterback to begin with, maybe when they're like 10 years old. But at the same time, I feel like Alonzo Barnett last year, completely different level of confidence than 3-4 years ago when he was, a freshman, redshirt freshman situation. So like that to me, I think is going to be interesting to see how like all those guys kind of just develop the mindset you need to play that role in a team that is coming off a college football playoff appearance. And, everybody kind of thinks that's the standard now for JMU, whether it's to actually get to the playoff game is one thing, but everybody's going to want and expect JMU to compete for a Sun Belt championship, despite the fact there's so many question marks. And that's quite a situation to throw whoever this quarterback ends up being into.
I mean, it's probably a position I wouldn't want myself to be in. That's a lot of stress, but like you said, making that CFP game is probably not something to expect every single year, but for JMU fans, I think the expectation is very much to at least be in the conversation, to be in the college football playoff every single year. And I just kind of watching this group, there is a lot of talent at the quarterback position, at this point in the year. And it will probably be something on display Saturday, but you kind of always expect the defense to be a little bit more ahead of the offense at this point in the year. But even with that, I think just watching these guys compete, there's a lot of talent in that room and a lot of talent around them as well. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out, but I do think that they have multiple guys in that room who are capable of being the leader of a program that kind of competes for the Sun Belt championship game and is in the conversation for a college football playoff spot.
Yeah, and shifting gears over to basketball before we wrap it up. Been a lot of news coming out of hoops here over the past week or two. We can start with the women's team. They get their first commitment out of the portal. I think pronouncing her first name right, Trent Taylor. She's a Atlanta area native who was playing down there at Kennesaw State, a 6'1" forward who really looks like, okay, we found somebody who can take some of Ashanti Barnes minutes as Ashanti graduates following a all Sun Belt performance his past season. Taylor, a similar size, similar scoring and rebounding ability, runs the floor, can kind of stretch the floor a little bit with some 3-point shooting, but also like gets after it underneath. Nobody's necessarily going to step right in and replace either Barnes or Peyton McDaniel, but seems like a very solid pickup for the first one out of the portal here.
They needed that. And I think we've talked about it over the last couple of weeks of needing that and, needing that experienced player to come in and be able to at least step into a starting role of some sort. Obviously, like you said, losing Ashanti Barnes is always going to, it's going to cause growing pains regardless of who you bring in, I would assume. So for them to at least hit the portal is definitely, a good sign to see them pick up someone who can fill that role, at least in some capacity, to pick someone up kind of early on, especially for a team that, over the last couple of especially last season, really didn't have to use the transfer portal to kind of fill in the missing pieces.
Yeah, they definitely were looking more for somebody to play roles rather than replace the stars the last couple of years out of the portal. So this is a little bit different, although I do think they expect some of the people that are already on the roster to step up into those standout roles. But also interesting, I think haven't got it confirmed yet. They've been mentioned for a couple other people in the portal here that would be very, very intriguing pickups if that happens. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week if that comes to pass. But on the men's side, they just a stream of people coming in, 5 commitments now, including a high school player to make that a 3-person high school class coming in. But we've gone very quickly from, really only having like 2 guys coming back to what is not a full roster, but it's it's a group you could go out and play with if you had to right now.
Yeah, I'm like, and again, I think we talked about this last week, but with this program and kind of how it went under the first season with Spradlin, I am curious to get to like December, January of next season and see where this group is at in terms of team chemistry and how they're gelling together and getting along. But when you compare this to last year after Spradlin's first year and building his kind of second roster with the program, they're in a much better position than they are, 365 days ago. So I think there is reason to be hopeful for JMU, but kind of similar to our conversations over the last couple of episodes, definitely want to see where this team gets to by like next December or January.
Yeah, and I haven't gone back and checked the exact dates of when people committed last year, but it does seem like, especially considering that the portal opened later this year, not till the Final Four, that it's very quick, much quicker getting to the point where, okay, now we got a core group here. Whereas last year, it seemed like it was into the summer. You're still wondering, okay, who's going to like play certain positions and things. They're definitely going to add more guys. But when you look at it right now, you've got some depth in the backcourt. Gage Lattimore is one we already talked about. He was the first commit. And then you get KJ Wyndham from Northwestern, who we'll see exactly. That's an interesting one because somebody who started off really promising there in the Big Ten and then just like got glued to the bench midway through his sophomore year for whatever reasons. Maybe we'll hear from him at some point, like what happened at Northwestern, but talent's certainly there. And then they go to the high school ranks and get Ashton Meeks, um, a DMV area product, 3-star recruit. I don't know if it's somebody they're going to like necessarily ask to play the starting point guard role like right away, but somebody that I think they may be able to get quality minutes out of. And then you throw him in with Paul Jones and some others that are back. You do at least have a backcourt existing now with the groups that are there, and a proven scorer in Gage Lattimore too, which I think is you look at how people are kind of changing how they build the roster. It seems like you want to go after like somebody who's proven production at each position, and then you're filling in with maybe people that you can afford, for lack of a better term. And they go out and they get a high scoring guard that I think probably at least guarantees that you have somebody who can get you some points on a given night.
Yeah, isn't it fun to like have a backcourt
Yeah.
going into at least like, early summer workouts or stuff like that? But it's definitely coming together and it has been I have seen I think a little bit more posts this year where people seem to not be as I don't want to say anti Spradlin because I don't think it ever really got there, but I think I've seen less posts about being super critical of him and how this portal is playing out, and I think I'm seeing a little bit more people being like, "You know what? I think this could work out next season."
Yeah, and this team's gonna be bigger. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
they may go out and find some like, smaller guards or something to fill in some of these spots. I think they're still gonna look for like one more post player. But even the fact that you're once again probably gonna have like 6'9" guys playing center unless they go out and find somebody else. But Jacob Hogarth, similar to Lattimore, he's your guy that you're bringing in the post that is the proven product. He's now shown that he can score and rebound at the mid-major level, and probably right now slots to come in and play the 4 or the 5 and start for JMU after averaging 10.7 rebounds at Gardner Webb. But I think some people will get a little bit hung up if they're playing a 6'9" guy at the 5, and AJ Evans, one of the freshmen coming in, is also 6'9". But they're going to be big across the board. We're looking at 6'3", 6'4" guards in the backcourt. Preston Fowler coming back is 6'8". He's a long 6'8" to play like the 3. And they got Garrett Sundra, the Notre Dame transfer, who's 6'11", who I don't think is probably going to play a lot of center for JMU, but like he's a stretch 4, or he goes out and shoots a 3, but it's 6'11". So you got like a lot of length on this team right now, with some room to go out and get more guys.
I can't even imagine being 6'11". Like I this team is gonna just listening to you go through the heights of these guys, like it's so similar to kind of like what we've seen on the football side of things where these coaching staffs are really valuing getting big guys in the door and kind of building a roster around that kind of idea.
Yeah. And given the fact that like anybody who's 6'10" or over like is like commanding $3 million in the portal right now, the fact that they've gotten some of these guys, I think it makes a ton of sense to go get somebody who was 6'9" and dominated at Gardner Webb to play in the post for you, like at this point, because of you're just not going to get that like 7-foot backup center from USC to come out here. Like he's looking for a big payday. But you're able to get somebody like Sundra, who I think had reasons to want to come back to Virginia, and doesn't really play the center. So despite being 6'11", I think maybe wasn't quite in that market. So I think they've played it really smart too, as far as, we'll see, I think, over time what Moneyball ends up being for college basketball and for like mid-majors in particular, like how you best spend the resources that you have. But I think they've played it really smart so far in the portal and getting a team put together that fits their budget and also appears ready to compete in the Sun Belt.
Yeah, it's I feel like we've talked about it with football too, that like having this in depth of conversations on basketball in last-ish week of April is just crazy. And I am curious too, like you said, to see how this market kind of plays out on the basketball side of things and where JMU can put its money and how it can divide it up between some of these guys to get back to March Madness. Because I mean, I think we all saw it with kind of how much fun it was in the AUBC and how much energy there was during that year where they went to March Madness.
Yeah, I think, I think that's one of the things about basketball is, the money that you put in, given that JMU is not putting in $20 million to their basketball team, like somebody like Kentucky might. I think there could be a return on investment for JMU in men's basketball when you put people in the seats in the AUBC all season long. And like what you saw when JMU went to Brooklyn a couple of years ago for the NCAA tournament, there were thousands of JMU fans there. Those are people that they were hitting up for donations then afterwards. Those were, people who like live in New York or New Jersey or Philadelphia or different places who maybe weren't following men's basketball all that closely for a couple of years, who were suddenly like engaged in it and then back engaged in JMU and JMU sports. I do think there can be a return on investment for basketball when you're not talking about gigantic sums of money. So I do, hopefully, if you're JMU, you find this worth it to go out and get these players and, try to make another run in NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're starting to see across the board in athletics. And I don't think we'll really see the monetary payout of what the CFP meant for football for a little bit longer. But I think JMU is very hopeful that those kind of things on the national stage are going to bring in a little bit more of a cash flow.
Yeah, and the whole everything school conversation too. Obviously, they're not on their way to a regional in baseball this year, or a lot of NCAA tournament appearances. But you can just think back to that year that we were talking about. That baseball regional appearance maybe on its own wasn't, okay, you can't set a monetary value of that. But I talk to people, it's like, just them making that appearance in the regional championship game. You turn on ESPN, you had to be like, JMU again, like in this sport too, like that year. It builds on itself, like when you have success across the board. And I think, there's some places where you kind of got to pick and choose what sports you're going to invest in. But, JMU, I think, can find value in continuing to really push and not say, okay, well, basketball is going to struggle. And I think we've seen that they tried to figure this out this offseason for both men's and women's basketball, like how they're going to continue to build off what success they've had.
Yeah, it's not a position that I envy for someone like Matt Roan or Cliff Wood. It's probably a stressful one at times, but even you look at the spring season has been a little bit down in terms of JMU's success that they usually experience, but it's still getting some big attention. I mean, you look at the games that programs have won. I mean, baseball, softball, and lacrosse all beat UVA when UVA was ranked in those respective sports. So they're still gaining that attention from kind of national media and outlets to kind of bring in some more attention for the athletic department.
Yeah, and if they have a stated goal of wanting to have 30,000 students by 2040, like that's how you start to do it. I think if you're JMU. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. We'll be back next week after the spring game, where we may have a lot more to say about all those football question marks we asked here a little while ago, and probably even more portal news, spring sports heading towards the end of the season. So plenty more to talk about in a week. But in the meantime, you've been listening to Purple and Bold from Daily News Record. I'm Shane Metlin with Katie Harper. Search DNR Media on all the podcast outlets and YouTube, and please like and subscribe.